there's plenty to clean up, but it's not as bad as you think it was. And he keeps improving week after week after week. And the Eagles are very comfortable with Jalen Hurts. Now, as I said, the offseason will have many discussions. Can they improve? I don't know. They're not getting Aaron Rodgers. I know that.
Maga Mac guys on your Birds 365. Early AM gathering to talk Philadelphia Eagles football, who are now in a driver's seat position to make the playoffs. They know if they win out, they're guaranteed to get in. There's a good chance that they could be in as of this Sunday if a couple other games go very figurable ways. Vikings losing to the Packers, the Saints losing to the Panthers, or the 49ers winning against Houston. You need the Vikings loss. That's a must-have. But either of the other two get the Eagles into the postseason if they beat Washington this week. So that's an advantageous position. In a season, John McMullen, that was supposed to be a transitional year, not only did Jeff Lurie use that phrase when he described the Eagles during this past offseason, maybe even more telling to me was the fact that he said, that's probably the main reason why Doug Peterson is no longer the coach. That Doug had a vision. Doug had a plan.
He wanted to win games, Jody.
Doug had this out of left field, off the wall stance that he actually wanted to win games in 2022. And that wasn't matching up with the Eagles' vision of the future was. So is Nick Sirianni actually putting his job in jeopardy here? Because he's winning games.
Yeah.
He could make the playoffs, John McMullen.
I said at the time it was one of the all-time Jeffrey Lurie dumb statements, and I'm proud to say it's come out that way. He somehow hired a coach who magically wants to win games, Jody. Yeah, I mean, it was silly when he said it. It continues to be silly today. And, people forget about it. That's the beautiful thing. As you mentioned, we'll go back to that again. What you mentioned, people forget the context and they forget and they just say, oh, that's a good hire. And, it's understandable. But, I'll say this, the Eagles are probably going to make the playoffs. It looks very good right now. The one concern you should have with that is, and you've seen this in the past, they were at a different stage coming off a Super Bowl, then making the run, making the 3 consecutive playoff bursts. But it was clear they weren't a real Super Bowl contender. And the Eagles kept acting like they were a real Super Bowl contender and were making decisions like they were a real Super Bowl contender, which contributed to the drop-off last season. The last thing you want to do this time around is overvalue the playoff positioning because of all the context we added into this show. There's still a lot of work to be done when it comes to personnel. And you can't let the decision-making be affected by wins over Jake Fromm and Garrett Gilbert. That to me is legitimate sort of fool's gold. And I don't think Howie Roseman's going to get caught in it. But you got to be careful of that stuff. You really do.
I think your point is dead on, but I'm going to make you go even a little bit further. When you started to paint the picture you were painting, it made me think more of the Phillies than the Eagles. Because the Phillies clung to that championship for way too many years. Our buddy Ruben Amaro thought that he still had an open window. He didn't realize it had been slammed shut in his face, and he just kept trying to add pieces, and then they paid a price for it further down the road. I think you're right. Last year, Howie was still of the mindset that we could win this whole thing, and they didn't, and they were pushed backwards even further than they needed to be. If your read is correct, which I think very well is, who are the guys the Eagles would be looking to move off a year earlier rather than a year too late? Give me a name or two of guys who are on this roster still doing good things for the Eagles that old man time is getting very close to pushing them backwards. Do you think the Eagles have to be very wary of, and maybe get a new younger player in that position going forward before
Well,
next year
I
comes?
think the two most difficult, and I'm not putting Brandon Brooks in this discussion because it's pretty obvious that there's some issues there. So I think you're probably not going to see Brandon Brooks again as a Philadelphia Eagle, but he hasn't played this year. So I think the most two essentially obviously got hurt very early. Two most difficult decisions are Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham. Those are the two most difficult decisions because they're both still good players. But you mentioned that phrase, and you probably got it from your dad very early on. And, it's better to give up on a player a year early than a year late. It's what made the Patriots great for so many years. At the time, you take a lot of hits, by the way, because there are certain players, but sort of if you do this thing right, you know that demarcation line of all right, we might be okay with this player. We're certainly better with this player, but by the time we're ready to really strike, they're going to be declining and they're not going to be effective. And that's very difficult thing to do. And I think those two players are the most difficult decisions because they're not going to get better players next year than Fletcher Cox playing defensive tackle and Brandon Graham playing edge rusher, but they could start the process with those 3 first round picks. Um, and, the goal is to hit the apex with everything coming together. And that's when you win the Super Bowl. And those are really, really difficult decisions, but I wouldn't think they would move on from both, certainly. So a lot of it is, who can you get? Um, as we mentioned with the draft picks, 19, 20, 23, if somebody wins in the wild card round, that's going to go down even further. Maybe a couple go up. Who knows? Maybe Miami falls apart, doesn't make the playoffs, and it goes a little bit higher. But maybe the Eagles fall apart. It goes a little bit higher. Unlikely to happen, but you never know. So a lot of it depends on who you can get in the draft. And obviously, if you get an edge rusher specifically, you would be more willing to move on from Brandon Graham at his age and coming off the injury and things like that. But those are very, very difficult decisions.
Fair enough. And I think you gave up two good names. I'd throw Rodney McLeod, maybe just because he had a very good week this past week. Rodney's had a mediocre
Well,
season for the level.
I'm at Rodney. This is it for Rodney. So I'm already at that point. They're
Yeah,
gonna move on from
no,
Rodney.
no chance that Rodney gets kept.
No, I don't. I
Okay.
don't think. But that
Um,
one's easier for me. That one's nothing against Rodney. He's not that level of player to begin with as Fletcher or Brandon. It is an age thing, an injury thing, and it's time to turn that sort of thing over. I think that's more natural for them than anything else.
which will Howie Roseman take more grief for if he moves off? Fletcher Cox or Brandon Graham? And Fletcher's having a really good second half of the season here. Didn't make a Pro Bowl, which you thought he had a chance on reputation only. That didn't happen, but he continues to be more productive on a week in, week out basis. So give Fletcher that much credit and analyze him at the end of this season through that lens. You got nothing out of Brandon Graham this year. But you also saw that without Brandon Graham, your defensive ends were not as good as you thought they were going to be. He's even older than Fletcher Cox. Which one would Howie take more grief from? If he moved away from either or both, which one would he hear it more from the Eagle fans?
Probably Brandon because he's so well liked. You know, um, and his personality. Everybody just loves Brandon. And I think there were a lot of people incorrectly, by the way, ready to move on from Fletcher Cox at the trade deadline and saying, just get away from him. He's not the player he once was because they're only looking at sacks. And by the way, Fletcher won it out as well. So that was part of it, and all of it sort of encompassing.
Whoa,
So I
whoa, whoa,
think,
whoa, whoa, whoa! I got to interrupt there. Fletcher wanted out as well.
yeah, he was not happy with this. He was honest. He was not happy with this scheme. He liked playing in Jim Schwartz's scheme, and he was allowed to do what he wanted to do. And um, Jonathan was asking him to do some different things. He was very honest in a public fashion. Didn't like that 4-eye technique. Didn't like the 5 technique. Now in the second half, things are starting to come together, and he's much happier. But at the trade deadline, Fletcher was fine with the Eagles moving him, um, and then the decision was made that wasn't going to work. Weren't going to be able to get what they wanted, and the two sides came together and said, "All right, let's do the best we can." Um, and the assumption was that he would be here next year, and by next year I mean 2022, and that's probably going to be the case. Sort of a gentleman's agreement at the trade deadline, but that can always change. I think from a fan base perspective, what we're talking about, I think they were okay with moving on from Fletcher Cox, which again I think is incorrect. It just took a while for him to get used to the new scheme. And now that he's having success, I think he's fine with it.
It's maybe just the way you said it because it kind of jumped out at me. Almost made it sound like Fletcher was requesting a trade. I know he didn't.
No, he was more of he was fine with the trade.
He was agreeable to a trade if
Yes.
it had come down.
Yes.
Yeah, that I understand. But I didn't think he was actually maneuvering to get himself out of town this year. And if he did or was, and the Eagles didn't get the job done on trading him, it's a good thing they didn't because he has played dynamite for them the last several weeks, and he is one of the reasons why this team is heading toward the postseason. What is the relationship between Fletcher and Gannon? You mentioned the system didn't seem to accentuate Fletcher's skills. Now all of a sudden it does. How do they get along as coach / star defensive player?
I think it's fine now. I think, one of the things, and I was kind of impressed with Jonathan, and by the way, I criticized him as well. I thought, the easiest way to go into a new situation is get your star players on board. And I don't think he did that with Fletcher particularly, and a little bit to Darius Slay as well. And now they both love him because they're both having Slay's having his best year ever. Um, and he's had some good years. This is his fourth Pro Bowl season. And now, as I said, it took a little bit longer for Fletcher, but now that he is seeing some of that success, I mean, it's hard. I brought up with Ed Kratz, the Eagles send out. So here's where we are I don't think people realize this. I'm pulling it up. Here's where we are with the Eagles defense, Jody. Number 5 overall, 5. Third in yards per play,
which
ninth
is
in rush yards
right.
again.
Just so the audience understands, I think most of them do, but there might be some that don't. When you say they're 5th ranked overall, that's yards per game. That's the metric that he used, which I think is a good one. But personally, I think points allowed per game is more accurate in telling what a defense was. Now you got to do a little homework. You got to take.
Yeah, you got to take out defensive scoring, which the Eagles have done. But I mean, they're top 10 in basically everything. So that's 5. They're 9th in rushing defense. They're 9th in passing defense. If you want it, they're 4th in yards per rush given up, 3rd in yards per play overall given up, 6th in yards per attempt, 4th in 3 and outs, 2nd in defensive touchdowns, 3rd in fewest explosive plays. I mean,
3rd, they should be 1st because that Jonathan Gannon's mandate: never give up a big play.
Still pretty good though.
Yeah, 3rd's not bad.
I don't know. That's again. I'll be the first one to add the context of the what I ran down in this show. A lot of it was playing against bad opponents and bad quarterbacks and all that. But this is the sample size of the NFL, Jody. And every other team has had some of those. You just saw Miami take advantage of the situation. Okay. But they're number 5 in their top 10 in every single meaningful defensive category. What do people want? One
They
across the board.
they want Jim Johnson back. You know
Yes.
what they want. They want Buddy Ryan back.
Yes.
Jonathan
Well,
Gannon is neither of those old school defensive guys, so therefore he's not going to hit home with a large chunk of the
and
Eagles
they'll
fan
love
base.
it, by the way, when you get the Buddy Ryan mentality and you get 15 yards, 15 yards, 15 yards, 15 yards, personal fouls, and it's a different game. People get over it. It's a different game. You got to play the rules as they are today. And again, you can go back to Jim Johnson, Buddy Ryan, anybody. How many seasons are they going to have where they're top 5 or top 10 in that many categories? Not a lot.
That
Not a
is
lot.
that is pretty impressive, and I think it's only going to get better because I don't think the Washington football team is going to do much offensively against this Eagles team either. I know Taylor Heineke is better than the quarterbacks the Eagles have faced the last 2 weeks, but he was awful against the Cowboys this
Yeah.
past week. I don't know if he just didn't get enough reps because he was on the COVID and he couldn't practice. But I've said all along, I think he's a viable NFL quarterback. Oh, he didn't look that way to me. He looked anything but viable against the Cowboys. Now, will the week back in football and getting snaps and maybe getting a little bit healthier again? I don't know what level the COVID virus hit him. Just know he was in the protocols. He didn't look like a quarterback that could beat the Eagles for the way he played last week
No,
against Dallas.
the one and Kyle Allen obviously had to come in. But I mean, they're both better than Garrett Gilbert. That's about, if you're looking at it from a Washington perspective, you're better off. But yeah, he played poorly. If he's probably not going to play that poorly in 2 consecutive games. So if you want to play the odds, that's against the Eagles. But I just think that team's dead in the water. I think they're dead in the water. I think they had an opportunity. That was a playoff game. That Tuesday night game here was a playoff game. And we talked about it at the time, the predictive sites and all that. The team that won it would be in a good position, and the team that lost it was essentially dead in the water. Washington knows that they're dead in the water.
And I agree with that. And that's why I was surprised when we had Ed Kretz on. He said, "Oh, I expect a stout effort from the Washington football team this
Well, I
week."
think he's going the rival NFC East, and sometimes they do. You do get up. The Giants get up more for the Eagles, even though they lose double digits every single season. Blah blah blah, that kind of stuff. But when you're bad, you're bad, man. There's usually a point in a season where teams that aren't going to the playoffs pull the plug, so to speak, from a human nature standpoint. And I think they've reached that point. It's not that they're a bad football team. They've realized the war is lost. And there's just a natural slumping of the shoulders, so to speak. And woe is me. And I think Washington is at that point.
As do I. The division, and I get it that we've seen too many examples of it just to dismiss it. But I think, just for my own edification, it's overstated. And you can't treat any NFC East game like any other game. It's different. Well, we saw 2 NFC East games last week. Okay, the Eagles completely snuffed the woebegone New York Giants in the second half of their game, and the Dallas Cowboys just completely destroyed the Washington football game. So those two bitter rivals gonna be right down to the last. No, neither one of them were anywhere near the last play of the game. They're both blowout victories. So I think that can play forward with this week as well. I think the Eagles are just going to beat the snot out of the Washington football team. While the Eagles are in the midst of this playoff push, the evaluation of Jalen Hurts continues to go on. I said this yesterday. I'll say it probably tomorrow and the day after, and then we'll get another game to evaluate this week. The Jalen Hurts detractors seem to me to just have a higher volume to them than the Jalen Hurts defenders. He ended up having a good game on Sunday. It was a B game. He had a quarterback rating of over 100. He made plays in the second half to lift the Eagles to victory. Yeah, he stunk in the first half. Yeah, he put the ball on the ground and could have a pick that was lucky that got overturned by a video review. He did not play well. But when you look at the big picture over the course of the 60 minutes, he had another winning game for the Philadelphia Eagles. How do we judge what he does against the Washington football team? A couple days in advance, John, which we'll certainly have a better grasp of how we should look at it when we get to Sunday. But as we sit here a couple days in advance, what kind of a game do you think this is just on the ability to rate Jalen Hurts? I'm not even asking you how you think he's going to play, but just in a playoff push, winning you can get in, mediocre opponent at this time. How much stock should we put in the kind of game that Jalen Hurts has on Sunday?
Yeah, I think they're all big for a first-year starter. I really do. And one thing I love about Nick Sirianni, and he did it this week because I think he's, hearing some of the things you just mentioned. And it's part of being a quarterback in the NFL. I think, I every starting quarterback in this league is under incredible, incredible scrutiny in every NFL city. Some are obviously more passionate than others, and Philadelphia's at the top of the list. But what Jalen is getting is no different than Carson Wentz got, or Donovan McNabb got, or going back to Jaws and everybody else, and Randall and everybody else, Mike Vick, so on and so forth. And one thing I love about Nick is he tries to educate fans, and he tries to educate fans through the media, and he tries to explain certain situations. Everybody, and I wrote about this on Billy Boys. Everybody was up in arms when Dallas Goedert was wide open in the end zone, and everybody got the screenshot, and he checked it down to Quez Watkins. He had already moved on. His progression, his pre-snap read, as Nick Sirianni said, ruled Dallas Goedert out, and he was coached to go in a different direction because of the coverage he saw from the Giants. Now, what Nick is trying to say, you can't assume as a quarterback the New York Giants are going to completely blow the coverage and completely allow Dallas Goedert alone. That's not your process. And as you look across the field, if you're looking to the left and your progression is taking you in that direction, well, guess what? It's not a video game. You don't see the guy standing over there that they busted the coverage on. So Nick said, you live with those. He did what he was supposed to do. And then this is another thing, and I'm glad he said this because we've had this discussion many times on this show about Miles Sanders. The old coaching staff would tell, but they wouldn't do it in public. They would only do it off the record behind the scenes. Would say, look, a lot of times Miles is not where he's supposed to be in the receiving game. And Carson Wentz would look awful at times. People would say, what the heck is he throwing the football? Running back's not in the right spot. The outlet receiver's not in the right spot. Happened again with Jalen Hurts. He looked bad. It was, and Nick explained it to, I forget what it was, 8 yards. Miles went 8 yards. He was supposed to go 5 yards. He's not there. He's not where he's supposed to be. And the quarterback looks atrocious. And he tells you this. Now, if people want to listen to it or don't listen to it, that's up to them. But I think it's I think it's a breath of fresh air. I think it helps you understand quarterback play, and what you think is a bad play is not necessarily a bad play. So, there's not to say Jalen Hurts had a poor first half, as he said, the ball security not good. Second straight week he did that. Should have lost the fumble. They got lucky. That interception he brought up as well that got overturned, got lucky there as well. There's plenty to clean up, but it's not as bad as you think it was. and he keeps improving week after week after week. And the Eagles are very comfortable with Jalen Hurts. As I said, the offseason will have many discussions. Can they improve? I don't know. They're not getting Aaron Rodgers. I know that. It's unlikely they get Russell Wilson. We'll talk about Deshaun Watson ad nauseum. If they can get a player like that, they'll get a player like that. If they can't, they'll be happy with Jalen Hurts.
You made the point of, quote unquote, the screenshot view that everybody got that absolutely showed Dallas Goedert wide open. Well, why the hell didn't he throw it to him? But you're right. And Sirianni went to great lengths to try and explain that, as did Jalen as well after the game, as to where they were at in that play at that time and how it all unfolded. Here's what I would have liked to have seen. And it always amazes me when they do this. I'm jumping sports again. The player tagging up in a baseball game, that they've got the split camera angles so you can see exactly when it hits the guy's glove and exactly when the player comes off the base. And they say they can merge those two things together, marry them up. And I always wonder, how do you know that you're not off? But they very confidently say this is an exact showing of when the ball is caught and wanted to see on that play. As Jalen Hurts goes back to cock and throw, now show me where Dallas Goedert is. Don't show me a second and a half after 2 seconds. Yeah, of course he's wide open because Jalen Hurts has already made the play to throw the ball in another direction. You just see Dallas Goedert wide open. You go, oh, how did he miss him? How did he not throw him the ball? Well, he had already started his progressions, cocking the ball, getting ready to throw it. He's not going to throw it to Dallas Goedert. That play looked really bad the way it was presented on television. It doesn't mean that that's the way it actually developed in real time.
Yeah, and what it didn't even get to your point of what you're saying, Jody, because of the coverage on the field, where with the coverage that the New York Giants were in, Dallas Goedert was the pre-snap read on that play. The Giants took him away pre-snap with their coverage, how they lined up in coverage, and then it was Jalen Hurts' job. He's coached to look in a different direction. So it didn't even get to that point. What happened was the Giants busted the coverage. And again, what Nick Sirianni is saying, you can't assume that the defense is out in the right coverage, but they're going to completely drop it and they're going to completely bust it. You have to do what you're coached, and you have to do what you're told. You say, okay, that's the coverage. Dallas is out. Now we go in this direction. That's what happened. That's why Nick Sirianni wasn't upset. He said it happens sometimes. Would you like to have the savvy of an Aaron Rodgers who might be able to pick that up and say, oh, guess out of the corner of my eye, I'm the greatest quarterback who ever lived. Can I see it? Yeah. So maybe somebody like that can do it. But the last thing you want, especially a young quarterback doing, is freelancing. When they're done, when they do what they're told and what they're coached to do, coaches are happy. Sometimes it doesn't work out.
It doesn't. And it did not play, but that's okay because the game worked out just fine for the Philadelphia Eagles. All right, he's John McMullen. I'm Jody McDonald. We will come back, put a bow on the show as we continue to move forward on a week where the Philadelphia Eagles may just make the playoffs for the 2021 season. Come back and wrap one up here on Birds 365.